You know, the thing about this episode is how there seems to be two extremes you can take it. On one hand, you can see it as a cute little episode about Pinky's silliness resulting in something great, showing us that you can find a friend in even the hardest nuts to crack. How uplifting. But on the other hand, it's an episode where Pinky's just humiliating this poor guy who just wants to be left alone with a super convenient and contrived ending. What I think is funny is how at the time of these episodes coming out, the show would make posts on Facebook about each of them to hype them up. And with these posts, they usually give you some kind of hook to look forward to the episode, such as, will this character solve this problem? Find out this week, sort of thing, you know? However, with this episode, it seems as if whatever underpaid intern was in charge of posting these had nothing positive to say about this episode, that they just left the prompt up for the audience to decide. We'll come back to this post in specific a little later, but before we do that, let's watch this episode again and weigh both sides and see which of these the episode lines up more with, since it can't be both at the same time, right? Well, 5 seconds into the episode, and there's a giant discrepancy with what we've seen 2 episodes ago. Based on this bed being here, it seems as though Pinky is back to living in Sugar Cube Corner like she was in Party of One. But, like we discussed 2 episodes ago, she was asleep in some other house at some point. It'd be one thing if they just decided to give Pinky her own house after that instance, with the implication being that she just made enough money and moved out of the bakery, or they had to make room for the babies and they kicked her out. But the fact that we get the same room that we saw her live in before just kind of breaks everything. You know, there was this girl that I was once interested in, and she'd always take a while to respond to my texts. And obviously, in between the times she would take to text me back, I wouldn't have been too happy. But when she did respond, I got the biggest surge of dopamine. So naturally, I'd enthusiastically text her back with the thought that she'd be finally down for a consistent conversation. But joke's on this guy, because when I responded, she decides to take another extended amount of time to get back to me. But when she did respond again, my dopamine spiked all the way up to the roof. But then the cycle repeated. She'd take forever to respond, and when she did, it was dopamine up, and then when she didn't, dopamine down. You know, dopamine spikes left and right. I guess my point is this.
Happy, sad, happy, sad, happy, sad.
Is an excellent visual representation of that. Happy, sad, happy, sad. Now, before you feel bad for me, it turns out that it was just character AI having server problems that day. It's all good now. What isn't good is how Pinky's exercise deals with shaking babies, which is, you know, awful for them. Actually, now that I think about it, maybe it is good, because it is good visual representation of how the mothers of people who hate on F- treated them while they were younger. Regardless, I'm glad they have this scene with them and integrating them into what's presumably Pinky's daily routine. That is great continuity from the episode Baby Cakes. Wow, good thing she landed on the pile of stuffies instead of on the ground, or better yet, on the crib or anything along those lines. Anywho, Pinky decides to go outside and start her day, including talking to this cow, in which her name is revealed.
Morning, Daisy Joe.
Because her previous appearance in Applebug season didn't actually have her be referred to by name, this is the first time we actually learn what her name is. She speaks for sure in that episode, but the only cow name we got in that episode was Muriella.
Muriella here saw one of those nasty snakes.
And in this spot where it'd be natural to name drop Daisy Joe, they just say this.
I completely understand. Just next time, try and steer clear of Ponyville. We certainly will, Applejack. So long, Winona.
Judging by the fact that her name is finally revealed here, it seems as if this conversation was an attempt at some world building to kind of flesh out characters we've seen before, or at least it had the outcome of being world building, even if that wasn't its explicit intention. Even if all we really got out of this conversation was this character's name, which is something we should have definitely known from her first appearance anyway. But whatever, I'll take what we can get for recurring characters for now, even if she barely appears in the show after this. Oh yeah, we get that information alongside this.
Here to pick up some cookies to go with your milk? Oh yeah, Pinky, don't you know?
So apparently these cows, or at least Daisy Joe, drinks her own milk. There are surely thoughts that come to mind about the implications of that, such as, is it normal for these cows to drink their own milk? Or is Daisy Joe just the weird one? Or is the "you're" here just talking about milk that she possesses rather than milk that comes out of her? Because that still means that she's drinking fluids that come out of her friends, which is kind of disgusting, especially if there's a human equivalent of this character in the Equestria Girls world. Now, maybe if this was dealing with a child cow character, this exchange would make a little bit more sense, because adult cows in real life apparently don't typically drink milk. So, on top of that, do you suppose moo
Moo sounds delightful.
is a part of her vocabulary as a member of the cow species, or is it like a tick that she has in particular? The ponies don't go around saying nay, so who knows? What we do know is that they speak of oatmeal.
Well, Mrs. Pink just baked a fresh batch of your favorite oatmeal.
Which perhaps adds a piece of the puzzle to this classic line.
And then I said, oatmeal? Are you crazy?
Maybe what she was saying there actually dealt with Daisy Joe.
Oh, Rose, your calla lilies look even better than last year.
Isn't it great that after being named in bridal gossip,
Look, Rose, how awful.
this makes Rose the first background pony to be called by name in multiple episodes?
Thanks, Pinky. Would you like one?
11 out of 10 voice as well, what the heck? Totally not a huge downgrade from her other instance of speaking.
The wicked enchantress has cursed them all.
I know the show's never consistent with background pony voices, but this one kind of stings just because of how iconic and genuinely funny her original voice was. Wow, good to know where Lily Valley's hairpin comes from. Mystery solved. But speaking of mysteries being solved, a mystery that hasn't gone solved is
Wearing my favorite tie.
Oh, shucks, Miss Pinky. You flatterer, you.
nobody knows who voiced that line. There's no mention in the credits. The best answer we have is what Rarity's voice actress said. She thinks it may have been one of the animators. I have no idea if she said this with some particular animator in mind, or if she was only guessing that it was an animator, based on what point of this episode's progress the line would have been recorded and stuff. This is such a mystery that even the wiki doesn't list off who it is, or his original English voice at least. And now I'm wondering if the guy who voiced this guy in the first place even remembers he did it. Then Pinky greets this character who's new to the show from this episode.
And Miss Matilda, happy birthday to you. In 132 days.
When everybody else she's greeted here has appeared before in the show. Wow, I wonder if that means she'll have plot relevance later on or not.
How do you remember everything about every pony?
'Cause every pony's my friend, and I love to see my friends smile.
Then we get a song,
My name is Pinkie Pie. Hello.
which we shall analyze later on in more detail in a separate soundtrack deep dive video. But there is this one line that kind of stuck out to me.
Doesn't matter now. What's up? If you are sad or blue.
Doesn't matter if you're blue. Well, that's racist. Or at least it wouldn't have been if she didn't literally go up to a blue pony just to say that. That's like when you have like a racially diverse group of people and you go up to the white guy and go, it doesn't matter if you're white. And go up to the black guy and go, doesn't matter if you're black. We're all equal. I thought that was implied. And if you go out of your way to mention it and you call more attention to it, it just sounds worse than if you didn't. Rather than just speaking to this hypothetical group of people and going, oh, we're all equal no matter what we are. Pinky would have had an out here because feeling blue is an actual term. But I'm just saying the fact that she went up to an actual blue pony is like, though the Cutie Mark Crusaders had a similar line in their song.
Run till our face is blue.
So at least this means that Pinky wouldn't discriminate against them if they ever come to that.
From here to grid.
I would personally probably hate to have a giant drawing of the face of one of my friends on the wall of my house / place of business, but that's just me. And if I were in Applejack's place, I'd probably paint over this thing the second Pinky leaves. Though, good thing Applejack actually seems happy with this, since we know that she was clearly too overwhelmed to have painted this thing on her own, and we also know that she's prone to not wanting help from people. I know she's changed since that episode, but still, but old habits die hard, right? So if she didn't end up liking this, that would probably mean that this would have set her back in terms of finally letting her friends help with stuff.
But Pinky will be there to show you.
Wow, is that foreshadowing for an episode where Pinky actually interacts with clones of her? Anyway, I love how Rarity is visible here, and then in this shot, she isn't.
Pony, smile,
And in this next shot, she is again.
all I really
And no, she's not just covered by those guys. I dissected this part frame by frame and didn't see a single instance of her coat or tail colors behind Twilight. I think the animators decided it was inefficient to animate her when most of her would be covered up anyway, which makes sense. Well, so the song ends and Pinky is greeted with a new face.
I've never seen you before.
Kid, you're smarter than you look.
We'll touch on this a lot more later, but in regards to Pinky and Cranky's dynamic, as a super random detail, apparently this was not inspired by the movie Up.
For your episode, A Friend Indeed, which features Cranky Doodle Donkey.
Wow, thanks for reminding the writer of the episode who the characters in her own episode she wrote are.
You know, you got this character who in a lot of ways reminds me of the main character from the Pixar movie Up. He's an older, cantankerous curmudgeon.
Do you have a word-a-day calendar or something?
And then you've got the secondary character, Pinkie Pie in this case, who in a lot of ways reminded me of the kid. Do you see that correlation?
Well, of course, if you draw specific similarities and lay them out like that, who wouldn't see the correlation? What kind of loaded question is that?
I definitely see that correlation. I can't remember, honestly, if in the story meeting we talked about that or not, but that's kind of an old, you can go kind of to Dennis the Menace even.
Which Dennis the Menace?
Choosing someone for Pinkie to annoy, going for somebody older because she's so childlike is a very fun choice. So I don't know that I was specifically thinking of the old man in Up, but I mean, yeah, you can certainly say that there are similarities with Up. I don't remember if we talked about that in the story meeting. I'm sorry.
It's fine. I draw correlations where there aren't some sometimes. It just happens.
So then Pinkie tries to guess what her new friend's name is, and we get this joke.
Property of CDD. I'm guessing that last D is for donkey. How about that C? Calvin, Calhoun, Caleb, Carl, Carmine, Carlos, Charlie?
Okay, that is a fine joke and all, but since when were those real-life human names anything that exists in this world? My theory is that based on this...
You've got to share. You've got to care. Hey! That's what I said!
Pinkie's able to break through the credits, therefore she knows that real life names exist somewhere out there. That probably makes the most sense, but skipping ahead a little, we get this whole sequence animated in felt.
Check. Introduce myself. Check. Sing random song out of nowhere. Check.
This scene was actually teased months before this episode came out by director Jason Thiessen. The images he attached to this are now lost media, from what I could gather, but apparently it was him working on the scene. And I think it's extra cool how his wife made this blog post with more context to this part. Originally, it was just written to be animated like the rest of the show. Jay suggested it be different for fun. We talked about doing it in paper, but we ended with felt. I have lots of experience with felt from my toys and cut out all the pieces. That took like a week because I only could work on it after I put the kid to bed. Then when it was all done, Jay built a makeshift table using our kitchen chairs and my Canon camera. Originally, it was just supposed to be still frames, but when it came down to check in, Jay was animating it. Of course, it worked out great, but we were not even sure it would get approved. But they loved and it was worth the risk. Well, that's wholesome. It's nice to read something sweet like that for a change. But daydreaming about positivity can wait. What matters now is how Pinkie starts messing with Cranky's belongings and... These last few notes are a reference to the theme song of the show, right? I'm not going crazy and hearing things that aren't there, right? Because it sounds similar enough, but not quite on the spot, so I can barely tell. I'm just gonna have to repeat what that interviewer guy said from earlier.
I draw correlations where there aren't some sometimes. It just happens.
Then Pinkie brings out this thing.
I promise not to hit your wagon because I got one of my own.
What's cool about this thing is how they made a minifigure toy version of it. And I'm impressed by and love the amount of detailing on this, especially with these printed wheels. The designs on the wheels here almost make up for how the front of the cart doesn't have Pinkie's cutie mark all colored in. And I just love how vigorously pissed off he looks here in this graphic. This almost makes up for the fact that her cutie mark is not colored in at all on the back of the cart. I joke, but I actually do like this. And I do appreciate how this was released in 2015 when this episode was released in 2012. So they went back 3 years later and they wiped the dust off this episode and went back and made this, which I think is pretty cool, and I'm glad that they were honoring such early season stuff back when the show would have been at season 5. Then again, maybe it's because the show started dipping in quality around season 5 and there wasn't any exciting things in season 5 to make toys of. So they tried pandering by making stuff from the better seasons, but I'll be generous here and say that I like this.
I must have put the confetti in the oven and the cake in the confetti cannons.
You think that's bad? Remember the time when you put the Chris in the oven and the chicken at the kitchen table?
Holy crap! Oh my god!
Now, while I may like the toy, what I don't like is this.
Hey, everybody! Does anybody have a toupee? Huh? Oh. This donkey is really, really bald!
A bald donkey in real life would look something along the lines of this. Now, the thing is, there's no image of a bald donkey on the internet. I checked, so I can't actually put an image up here, but, I've seen how bald dogs and bald bears look. So just take that principle and apply it to a donkey. So I guess my point is that Cranky isn't actually technically bald. Though this whole joke did make me fall into this whole rabbit hole of baldness in animated animals, especially when baldness is used to show the effects of aging, whilst ironically giving the character more hair than those who aren't meant to be bald. For example, if we look at Cranky Kong, strange how both of these characters are called Cranky, but sure, in order to accentuate his baldness, they gave him some hair around the top of his head, but in doing so, there's now the side effect of him actually having more hair and longer hair than his technically not bald pals. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I think it's just a funny side effect of anthropomorphic animal character design, but I think it's cool that if we do compare Cranky Doodle's design with other donkeys or mules in the show, the baldness logic for them is consistent. Good job. Except I just realized that if mules exist in this world, a pony must have done it with a donkey at some point. Okay.
I have had enough!
You're losing him, Pinky.
You know, I think usually I'd be all, well, how convenient is it that there just so happened to be a patch of grass right next to Cranky when there aren't any other patches of grass in sight. But I'm more taken aback by how Cranky has excellent improvisational skills in terms of using that as a wig that I can't even be mad. I mean, sure, you could still technically be mad that there was a patch of grass next to him anyway, coincidentally, but I think the fact that he has such creative improvisational abilities is a testament on the writer's good creative thinking skills. So I'll give props to that. Awesome.
Let me make it up to you.
No!
Well, in order to make it up to Cranky, Pinky decides to take him to the spa. And can you believe that this is only the third time in the show so far where we've seen this building? Though, it seems as if they did some remodeling at their front desk between episodes. And it seems as if Lotus isn't the front desk person anymore, but at least she kept her job as the hot water pouring thing, because that was her role in a season 1 episode.
But you will not believe what...
It's actually such a specific thing to be consistent throughout episodes, though the method in which the hot water is poured is different now. But the fact that they kept the same spa pony rather than mixing the two up for this one specific job is kind of crazy. And I wonder if that was on purpose or they just accidentally got it correct. Although it does seem like the exterior got a complete visual revamp.
Hi, Cranky. I have a gift for you.
The spa treatment was gift enough.
It's not going to explode or anything.
An exploding gift? Is that a reference to Jokey Smurf?
I brought you a surprise.
That is some lovely laughter. Let's hear that again. Well, unfortunately, Pinky gives her gift, but doesn't laugh maniacally.
It's a new toupee. I had my friend Rarity make it.
This is wonderful. Thanks, kid.
But she does smile maniacally. Bro, this face is terrifying. She seems to be channeling her inner Cupcakes Pinky here. But on the note of Pinky's expressions, they seem to really go out of their way to give her a whole bunch of goofy looking faces throughout this episode. That's kind of funny.
He's starting to warm up, but still no smile.
Wow, a tuba, a ukulele, and a guitar? Cranky must be one hell of a musician. And also, judging by the fact that he owns a camera and this iron thing, I guess Cranky used to also be a photographer and a blacksmith. Jack of all trades, huh?
What you doing there, old buddy, old pal? I'll give you 2 bits for this.
I'll just say it's a little disgusting that, Derpy isn't here because, what? Is this official Derpy merchandise within the universe? If so, why does Cranky have this? Or did she somehow shrink herself like a doofus and somehow end up in a random snow globe? I don't think I like the implications of any of these possibilities, since that means that there's like a billion more questions to follow, such as, is Derpy the only pony here with merch of her likeness? Well, we know Rainbow Dash at least has stuff made of her, and so does Rarity, sort of. But Derpy seems to be the only one who gets a whole snow globe dedicated to her. And now that I think about it, you know, I'd love to get a snow globe made of me one day. That sounds awesome. Either way, I'm actually kind of surprised nobody's tried making this thing in real life, or at least done it and lived to tell the tale. Especially when people made chimichangas a real thing, when there's not even a visual reference for it in the show. There's literally a visual representation of the snow globe, but apparently no one's tried DIYing this thing. Possibly a fun project for one of you to tackle if you like arts and crafts. Though, just to make one more quick comment about the snow globe, the reflection / fisheye effect of Pinky behind the glass is a really cool signifier of how there's attention to detail in animation here. A lazier show would probably not have done that. It wouldn't have made Pinky bulge like this through the glass. It would have just kept her flat. And I just want to note things like that when I notice them so that I'm presenting genuine strengths of the show rather than only being hyperbolic about the negatives all the time. such as how in the very next scene,
I'm not selling, kid.
the snow globe no longer has Derpy in it. What? Is this an error or did Derpy escape between shots or what? But that's besides the point because Pinky then does what I think might be the most evil action that we've seen anyone commit in the entire show up until this point. Especially because this causes Cranky, who's super no-nonsense and is an actual established adult who's completely capable of rolling with the punches usually, to tear up. That's actually evil. It doesn't matter if this whole thing was technically accidental. None of this would have happened if she just listened to Cranky and didn't insist on inviting herself into his house. Considering all that, I think he was a little too soft with his reaction here.
Listen to me, kid. I will never be your friend.
Never or never ever?
Never, ever, 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 ever.
That's 4 evers. That's like forever.
Wow, way to rip off Rainbow Dash.
Forever is way too long to be trapped in gas and gorge. I mean, it's like forever.
So Pinky ends up at Twilight's treehouse for some reason, and
I know this is hard for you, Pinky, seeing that you're friends with every pony, but you just have to accept that Cranky is going to be an exception. He just doesn't want to be bothered.
yeah, neither did you.
You see, I saw you when you first got here, remember? You were all hello, and I was all, oh, remember? You see, I never saw you before, and if I never saw you before, that meant you're new. Because I know every pony, and I mean every pony.
But you ended up warming up to her anyway, so who knows?
Yeah, he doesn't want to be bothered by your over-the-top super hyper antics.
And neither did you.
Rainbow Dash!
Pinkie Pie? Not again.
Well, look at how you guys turned out. Also, Rainbow Dash reading Daring Do is an excellent touch of detail, especially when I've been bringing up how most inconsistencies with this show are due to the show having freelance writers for each episode rather than a centralized team that worked everything out together. Yet, this is a good specific callback to an episode written by somebody other than this episode's writer. That's fantastic. What's not fantastic is how there was supposed to be a deleted scene here. Well, okay, I guess it wasn't supposed to be a delete. There was supposed to be a scene that was deleted here. There we go. And reading it, I'm guessing this scene was actually supposed to take place in public rather than the library since it involved this boy pony named Gallop-A-Gus who picks some flowers and heads towards Dashie. Rainbow lands on the ground. Pinky stops pacing. I don't see what the big deal is. So what if some guy doesn't like you? I don't like plenty of ponies and it's no big deal. She then gestures at Gallop-A-Gus, who has almost reached her with the flowers. Like Gallop-A-Gus over there. I don't like him at all and he doesn't care. Gallop-A-Gus hears this and hangs his head. He sadly slumps off with his flowers. We're just trying to say that just because one guy doesn't like you doesn't make you unlikable. It just means that he doesn't want to be bothered. I get what you're saying, and I guess I can leave Cranky alone. Good job, Pinky. Right after he accepts my apology, Pinky runs off, leaving Twilight shaking her head. Rainbow sees Gallop-A-Gus peeking at her from behind a tree. Go away, Gallop-A-Gus. He ducks back behind the tree. Jiminy, that guy just bugs me. Well, that would have been pretty cool to have in the show. I could definitely see a lot of ship fics or episodes with him and Rainbow Dash or something along those lines. Actually, I guess that kind of depends on what his appearance would have been like. Now, Miss Rogers did point out who this specific pony is or was supposed to be, but this shot she describes here also seems like it didn't make it to the screen, so oh well. I am somewhat of a fan of long-term will they, won't they crush plots. So I think this guy being in the show would have added some flair that would have kept things interesting, assuming he wouldn't have just been relegated to this one scene as a throwaway joke. But I can definitely see why this was left on the cutting room floor. It's kind of mean-spirited and doesn't really further the plot with Cranky whatsoever, but I think it would have made for some excellent world building. Oh well, so Pinky goes back to Cranky to apologize and
And I guess I can leave Cranky alone. Right after he accepts my apology.
And then we get a chase scene that's incredibly reminiscent of the one from Griffin the Brush-Off.
Really? 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 Really?
Phew, that was close.
Hi again!
Okay, to be fair, it's not like this episode was ripping off that episode necessarily. It's just that both of these scenes are a reference to Droopy. I have a few thoughts on this. To start, I think I've really hammered in on the fact that this show has a lot of classic cartoon influences during our season 1 retrospective, and I think throughout the season 2 one so far, I've given those references praise anytime it makes some, because that shows some good consistency throughout the universe that they're trying to build up, and also brings about consistency in terms of writing throughout the episodes. So by that logic, I should give this scene a thumbs up. However, if we're weighing this against how Pink is actually just being an unrelenting stalker here who won't leave this guy who just wants all this tormenting to stop alone, this is kind of overkill. Not because of the stalker behavior necessarily, because I do that in real life too, but I just think that if they want us to at least find Pinky's efforts here to be funny or likable, I think this would have benefited from a more original method of showing that rather than, you know, just reusing what we've seen her do before. Twice, in fact. This exact thing was also done in Party of One. I guess my point is that if we remove this reused joke, what more information does this scene ultimately offer besides showing us that Pinky is a stalker with godlike abilities? At least all this is a good follow-up to what Pinky said about not understanding the concept of personal space.
Oh, Pinky, what are you doing? Really? You're a personal space? Well,
But this seems like grounds for a lawsuit.
Please accept my apology.
Wow, is that a reference to that character she played?
I am a chancellor. I was elected because I know how to think outside the box, which means I can also think inside the chimney.
If so, I'm actually kind of impressed that there's a callback to that episode. Anywho, we'll come back to this in much more detail later, but Pinky reunites Cranky with Matilda, his long-lost lover, and... then we get Cranky's backstory.
The night we met at the gala was the most magical night of my life.
Between this flashback and the felt scene from earlier, it seems as though they were really experimenting with different styles of presenting animation. So that's a huge, good leap forward for the show at this point. That's quite awesome. What's not awesome is this.
But when I came to your room the next day, you were gone.
Didn't you get my note?
No, I never got it.
Who puts a note like that on the backside of the door? As sort of touching this backstory is, if my long-lost lover had only the brain capacity to put a super important note like that on the backside of a door, I don't think I'd want her anymore. Because at that point, I'd be all, Sunset Shimmer, will you do me the honors and make me the happiest man alive? And her answer would be something stupid like, you know that I'm not actually real, right? You're delusional. Which, come on, man, that's nonsense. Either way, all this gets wrapped up in a nice bow and...
Joy. I got boy.
Pinky?
Whoops, privacy. Sorry.
Well, that's inappropriate. What's with them starting to make out with them telling Pinky that they want privacy? And why is Pinky trying to watch? Well, speaking of watching, that's it for this episode, except this one has a unique outro song for some reason. The only other episode in this entire show so far that's had a unique outro instead of the standard was The Return of Harmony. Which makes sense since it was the grand return of the show after a hiatus. It makes sense to do something special like that for that episode, especially with how much the fandom has surely grown between the seasons. However, what's the big deal with this episode? I mean, okay, so, like I was mentioning, I'm not honestly completely sold on this episode. We'll start with the positives and then go on to the not so positives. Firstly, I think even among the people who really don't like this episode as a whole will surely agree that the Smile song is great, and I honestly think that might be the highest point of this episode. Perhaps I'm just blinded by nostalgia since the instrumental version of the song is used as the loading music of the mobile game. And I played that thing a fair bit when I was younger, so perhaps this whole thing's just ingrained into my head as something positive.
Friendship is magic.
And so needless to say, even though I did say it, so I guess it was needed, I enjoy the song. But I'm not too sure how to feel about its place in the episode. or any episode for that matter. It's a pretty long song to be put in a standard 22-minute TV episode. It sits at about 3.5 minutes, which is a big chunk of the episode's overall runtime. What doesn't really help is how there's a bunch of other songs in this episode as well, but at least those ones are relevant to the plot, such as how this one leaves us on a nice high point to leap onto this release.
Come on now, Doodle. Give us smile.
No pony calls me Doodle.
And I do get that the rhetoric of the Smile song is to show that Pinkie really is friends with every pony in town. And thus, when her unbridled outgoingness matches this Eeyore XP's unbridled leave me aloneness, it makes for a sharp contrast. But I don't think we needed to dedicate 15% of this episode to that fact that we already kind of know. The fact that the episode actually reestablishes really well through dialogue and action, outside of the song as well, by the way, especially if the parts that aren't the song are just Pinkie being completely inconsiderate and tormenting Cranky for just existing until the very end of the episode. I'm just saying, if they used the screen time dedicated to some of the music numbers to some slower scenes of Pinkie reflecting on her actions a bit, even if she ended up coming to the wrong conclusion and continues to torment Cranky, at least it would have given this episode some time to breathe and show that Pinkie isn't just some one-note inconsiderate people pleaser who's constantly invading personal space. And we get some of that with the treehouse scene, and I think that might actually be one of the stronger parts of the episode, because we see some actual thought process being relayed rather than just constant action on the move and stuff. And to tie this kind of back into Griffin the Brush Off, I think the super similar treehouse scene where Pinkie consults Twilight for additional opinion about her situation with Gilda may have actually been one of the stronger parts of the episode. Still, I'm glad, very glad, that the song is at least catchy and actually memorable and uplifting. If an episode had a long song that wasn't even good and goes nowhere besides eating up a considerate portion of the runtime, I'd be a lot less forgiving. But on the topic of the rest of the episode, I like the concept. I really dig the concept of the unrelenting let's be friends character going up against the whole yeah, let's not character.
Gosh, I could never have too many friends.
Well, why don't you go and make some more?
Especially when I'm sure we've all been on both sides of the extreme at some point. There's also the added bonus of this new special character being a donkey, which gives him a distinctive trait from all the other usual pony characters without trying too hard to make this design super special. And this is twofold. If it was a pony yet looked super special with a bunch of fancy designs like this and was a standout character of an episode, I think that may have kind of, shifted the spotlight to the wrong aspects of the episode. And perhaps the rest of the show if it becomes like a recurring background character. And on the other hand, as a character design itself, this really isn't all that special if we were looking at this in the context of a donkey world where all the other characters are donkeys. It doesn't have any unique clothing, no special hair, no cutie mark, but because even though he's bland, he's placed there juxtaposed with other ponies rather than other donkeys, it does look special, and they didn't have to go out of their way to design like a super complex design just to give this one episode a memorable character. So I guess my point is, I think Cranky's character was a really good decision. But speaking of good decisions, the opposite of that is I'm not quite sure what to think of the ending. Like I said, we've all probably been on both sides of Pinkie and Cranky here, but I'm not sure if that situation ended in a perfect, neat bow with a cherry on top like the conflict of this episode ends. Now, Pinkie was able to piece this whole thing together and make it up to Cranky, but that was only possible because Cranky had this whole unresolved situation in the first place. Also because Pinkie has some outer worldly deductive reasoning skills and eidetic memory.
In your scrapbook, there was a flower, an old ticket, and a menu from the Grand Galloping Gala.
And not a whole lot of us have that. And also the only real clue was this.
It's awfully pretty.
Yeah, she was.
Huh?
I mean, it was. I mean, it is. Yes, it's pretty. Now put it down.
Along with the fact that this other donkey happens to live in this town.
Pinkie Pie.
And also this fact that we as the audience were never told throughout the episode.
But how could you have ever seen them before?
Because I also have them in my scrapbook.
And I'd seen them in Matilda's book.
What the heck? My point is that the only reason this episode ended on such an okay note is due to Contrivance. Now, that's not to say that the show is teaching that the result of bothering people like Cranky will always result in fixing one of their greatest life problems, but it's also not a lesson in something along the lines of sometimes you can't be everything to everyone, which is a little bit more in tune with being an applicable moral for the target audience, I think, especially because of what Twilight was saying.
but you just have to accept that Cranky is gonna be an exception.
I thought that was building up to something, especially with Rainbow Dash roasting Pinkie.
Yeah, he doesn't want to be bothered by your over-the-top super hyper antics.
And Pinkie coming to terms with reality here.
It's okay, Twilight. I get what you're saying. What you're both saying.
But then they just kind of completely drop it here.
I can leave Cranky alone. Right after he accepts my apology.
I was originally thinking, wow, that's a very mature lesson. But then, you know, that's not the case. Pinkie gets to have her cake and eat it too. Now, let's consider what Pinkie says in her own words to Princess Celestia.
Dear Princess Celestia, there are many different kinds of friends and many ways to express friendship.
Well, judging by how some of these ponies are cloned, it doesn't seem like there's that many types of friends.
Some friends like to run and laugh and play together.
Oh yeah? Is that why those ponies in specific expressed annoyance at you? Okay, I kid, but what she says next here kind of rubs me the wrong way.
But others just like to be left alone, and that's fine too. But the best thing about friendship is being able to make your friends smile.
Which, yes, is what I was pushing for. But at the same time, how did she come to that conclusion? If she had done that from the beginning, that means she never would have reunited Cranky and Matilda, which would have been depressing. So while I agree with this in principle, in practice here, I don't understand how this is a lesson Pinkie learned. If we just didn't have the subplot with Matilda and the entire plot revolved around not bothering people, that would have been fine. But man, I do get that not everybody you meet will like you is not an easy lesson for kids to hear. And honestly, pretty hard for even adults to fully accept as well. But I think it would have probably been a more applicable lesson if we leaned a little bit more on that. Maybe with perhaps Pinkie only getting a small win with Cranky, with him being a recurring character Pinkie has to work on over time, rather than her literally fixing his entire life in the course of an afternoon. To be fair though, for all we know, that might have been more in line with what the writer of the episode wanted as well. But because this show was run in a way where the writers had no real promise that they'll be brought back for another episode, the way this episode was done was the only real way to guarantee a happy ending that the writer intended. But to circle back a little, it's very convenient that Cranky had some giant life problem that could be solved like this. I don't know if the show is implying that all people in real life who act like Cranky have something that he did, and we should thus always probe around for that in order to be their friend, or if the show's saying that's sometimes or often the case, or if the show's saying Pinkie just got lucky in this instance. This is actually impossible to judge without multiple instances of Pinkie doing this exact thing to people with a similar personality to Cranky, or perhaps even the opposite of that. I don't know, any variable that would mean we'd have anything but a sample size of 1. Though, if it is saying something like that, I think that's bad, because I know this is a specifically dark example, but what if the reason someone like Cranky is the way they are is because their parent or child died or something? Like I said, I know that's a specifically dark example, but it's a real example, and I'm not trying to make a joke out of that. What I'm trying to say is that obviously stuff like that ain't solvable in the same way as reuniting them with their long-lost lover. And on top of that, I don't think that's something anyone would really be super open to share about, especially to someone they just met, like Cranky to Pinkie. Especially because in Cranky's perspective, he has nothing in common with this person bothering him, embarrassing him, destroying his belongings by almost setting his entire house on fire, making him cry, and stalking him. Not to mention he's way older and more experienced than Pinkie, so why would he want to open up about personal problems to somebody like that? And I think it takes a level of maturity on the side of being like Pinkie here to kind of realize that. Though, while that may sound hopeless, it actually isn't. Now, you may know people who are going through really rough problems like that aren't as relatively effortless to solve as what Pinkie did for Cranky. And yeah, I know people like that too. That hypothetical I just brought up didn't come out of nowhere, but I think the solution is actually pretty simple. Just be there for them. I think that's the solution for most problems people have. Nobody wants to face things alone, right? I know you probably don't, but instead of always thinking, man, I wish I had someone to be here for me, let's also try to take initiative to be there for others who are definitely thinking that. So I'll leave this episode with that thought. If there's someone you know or think is not doing very well, go reach out and just be there for them and remind them that they exist. Now, as I said earlier, let us go back to that Facebook post, because it's asking us for advice on how to make friends, which kind of seems strange because I thought that was your job, especially when this other Facebook post by them put out this poll asking what genre of My Little Pony fan you are while these episodes were coming out. And the majority of them seem to be, you know, socially inept neckbeard brony types. So I don't know why they would be asking them on friendship advice. But let's take a look at some of these. Here's hoping for the official premiere of Smile, Smile, Smile. Smile, Smile, Smile. Yup, Smile, Smile, Smile is coming. I hope they play the Smile, Smile, Smile song. Please let it happen. Brace yourselves, Smile, Smile, Smile is coming. I haven't made a new friend in over 2 years, lol. Be yourself. Just be yourself. Be yourself. 2 words, be yourself. That's my answer. Well, thanks for nothing. Very, very insightful. I don't know what else I expected. Now, if you ask this socially inept neckbeard brony for friendship advice, I do have really one solid bit of, I guess it applies to everything in life, not just friendship advice, but I do have some actual thing for life improvement, which would be to subscribe to F-, baby.